Hi, Krishna.
Hi, Krishna.
Remind me your name.
Prema.
Prema. Okay, why don't you tell me, and
My name is Vidya. Vidya.
Vidya, why don't you tell me why you're here? That helps me, say what I know what I should say. Vidya, Prema.
Yes.
Tell me.
Oh, I like to write.
You like to write.
Was really excited about something like this.
Okay, good.
I also do a lot of writing, and there was no description per se, so
Right.
I was intrigued, and the fact that it was you doing it
Okay.
was a big draw.
That was a big draw.
Yeah, pretty much.
Same.
Pretty much the same.
I'm starting to edit Vasudev's
Right.
material, and we just kind of talked, and I jumped at the opportunity to hear directly from you. Sir
Okay.
Prabhupada.
Thanh you, Vidya.
Ravinder Sri said you were one of the best editors, and he loved your work on his work.
I worked on his work.
I've served for many years as a copy editor and proofreader, so to have the opportunity to hear from you.
Professionally?
No, not professionally, just in seva.
A seva?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, good. Okay. The first question is why we edit things. I have a couple of quotations from ads that give it the idea. Auto repair service, free pickup and delivery. Try us once, you'll never go anywhere again. Dog for sale, eats anything and is fond of children. Man wanted to work in dynamite factory, must be willing to travel. Stock up and save, limit 1. More seriously, this is a GBC resolution from 1987 or something. It is recommended that Ishtagosti be convened by the Continental GBC Committees for North America, Europe, and India each year between 30 and 90 days prior to the International GBC meeting. India may hold their meeting during the month of Kartik. With all GBC men in those areas, interested ISKCON managers and sannyasis of the continent, and other senior devotees upon invitation to hear formal reports on the year's progress from Continental GBC zonal secretaries and other leaders. You got that, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm going to throw my phone onto silent, which is a recommended place for your phone to be. Okay. There's a very good book by James J. Kilpatrick, who was a writer for National Review. The Pleasure of the Hike, he's talking about writing as a journey and the author as a forest guide. The pleasure of the hike depends to a large extent on how often the reader stumbles. Then he says, it is the little uncertainty that matters, the small confusion, the modifier that isn't badly lost, but only slightly misplaced. All of these things set us off. Wilson Follett, he's another guru. A cardinal principle of good writing is that no one should ever have to read a sentence twice because of the way it is put together. And Kilpatrick comments, notice the qualification. We may often want to read a sentence twice because the sentence has beauty or punch or wit, or because it contains provocative thoughts, but we ought never to have to read a sentence twice because of the way it's put together. Editing and writing, we have several writers here, are, I would say, two different skill sets. And they call for two different mentalities unless you want to suffer like Rabindra Swarup Prabhu. The writing is a creative process. You get it out there, you come up with something and you get your ideas on paper. And editing is a critical process. You examine the ideas that are there, you examine the words that are there, the thought process, and you say, what about this, what about that? And you look for things that are not very good and should be made better. If you try doing both at the same time, then you may find that your editorial critical process interferes with your creative process. You can do it. Rabindra Swarup is the person who comes to mind who won't let a sentence go until he's done with it. But it's, as he admits, torture, self-torture. Satsvarup Maharaj is on the opposite end of the spectrum. Just find one way or another to churn it out, churn it out, churn it out, and later you can look at it and maybe do something about it. So two different exercises, two different functions here. If you're not editing your own work, if you're editing someone else's, the first question is, who are you serving? Of course, we're serving Krishna, but you're serving the author, whether it's actually, even if you are the author, you're serving the author, whether it's you or someone else. And you're serving the publisher, who has an interest in putting out good books. And you're serving the reader, who depends on you to deliver a book that's cogent and clear and perhaps enjoyable. So you're the servant of these stakeholders in the writing project. This is from the elements of style, which everybody either has or has to get. If you're in the writing or editing business, it's called Strunk and White, the elements of style. White, in his introduction, talking about his professor, William Strunk, said, "Will felt that the reader was in serious trouble most of the time. A man floundering in a swamp, and that it was the duty of anyone attempting to write English to drain this swamp quickly and get his man up on dry ground, or at least throw him a rope." For Vaishnava editors, one should know the Vaishnava Siddhanta, first of all. Prabhupada told the editors of B2G, actually, he said, we have got some Siddhantas, some conclusions. And the editors have to know those Siddhantas, those conclusions. That's the most important thing. Even if your English is terrible, if your Siddhantas are good, you're in business. If your Siddhantas are bad, it doesn't matter how good your English is. Editors should follow Vaishnava Sadachar. They should have good sadhana. And editors should be scrutinizing. That was the term that Prabhupada used. Editors should be scrutinizing. I should also stop here to note what our planned schedule is. I didn't announce that in the beginning. It's contemplated that we'll go till 12:30,
Yes.
break for lunch,
Yeah.
and start again at 1:30?
1:30.
Okay, and go till about 3:30?
Yes.
Is that okay? Yeah, good. We can say that there are two kinds of editing. One is mechanical, and the other is substantive. Substantive editing, you're dealing with the substance. Is it true? Is it legitimate? Is it intelligible? Does one thought follow another? You're looking at, does it need to be said? Is there something that isn't said that needs to be said? You're dealing with the substance of your text. And mechanical means you're dealing with grammar, you're dealing with spelling, you're dealing with capitalization, you're dealing with style, which for editors usually means not your manner of writing, but rather mechanics. Is something, Jamuna River, is it a capital R or a lowercase r? These are all questions of style. Is a punctuation mark after an italic word, Roman or italic. These are all questions of style. There's also the other kind of style, flourish and all of that, but mechanics style. Your methods for editing are going to be rethinking, looking at the thoughts and see if they make sense or could be made more clear, cutting, rearranging, rewording, polishing. These are all the things that editors do. Or these are all things that editors do. Editors also do other things. Cutting is perhaps the most prominent of all of these things. William Zinsser, his book is called On Writing Well. It's also one of the canonical works of editors and writers. Writing improves in direct ratio to the number of things we can keep out of it. And by the way, if there are any questions or comments along the line, stop me and we'll give attention. What can you cut? You can cut sections. You can cut pages. You can cut from the beginning. When I was the editor of BTG, I often did that. I just put my pen at the left-hand top corner of the first page and just kept going until there was something that you'd want to read. Famously, who is it? Ezra Pound edited The Wasteland, and there's a what's the word? Facsimile version available of the edited text, and it runs and runs and runs with slashes and arrows and what have you, and he cut out a huge parts of it, starting I think with however many number of pages in the beginning. If you're going to edit T.S. Eliot, you'd better be Ezra Pound or someone equally good. But if you know what you're doing, then start at the beginning and cut till you get to something. The other way to do it is at the end. People don't know when to stop, so the end can be cut, paragraphs can be cut, sentences can be cut, words can be cut. Yes?
So you mentioned about sometimes it's rewording or polishing.
Mm-hmm.
I've been asked to edit things by other people of low consequence, but I always wondered because I read the text and I'm not sure where that line is of crossing over into my voice and allowing for their voice. I find that very confusing.
It's a constant challenge for editors. Your job is to present the author at his best. When the editor starts to extrude, I guess, when he appears and overshadows the author, then you have a problem. Or when people say, that's not my voice, or that's not his voice, then you're in problem land. So, but often, then you're in problem land. So you always want to be conscious that I want to keep the thoughts of the essential thoughts of my author. I want to keep the voice of my author. But often, what you get on the paper isn't really the best thoughts of the author or his best voice. It's a sort of a shabby semblance, or a what's the word? Disarrayed, scattered, a scattered sort of semblance of the author's best style and best thoughts, and he really needs to be pulled into shape. The best authors appreciate that, or many of the best authors. Let's start again. Easy to work with authors appreciate it. And you get these great author-editor collaborations where the editor respects the author, and the author appreciates the work of the editor, and you can really work well. But often it works the other way, where the author's real prickly and doesn't want any interference, and he needs it like a baby needs milk, and he doesn't understand it. So then it's a negotiation, it's a struggle, or it's a project. It's a project. And there's a book, I think it's called The Forest from the Trees, by yeah, you've seen that book?
Betsy somebody? Betsy
A
somebody?
lady, I don't remember who.
Yeah.
Which really deals with the role of editor as psychotherapist more than anything else. Because so many of your best-selling authors are drunkards, obsessive-compulsive disorder people, suicidal, all sorts of, they're all in their heads, and they're mental cases, many of them, and procrastinators, and they lack self-confidence, and then they go for months without writing a word, and all of this kind of stuff. And so you do get, in the professional editing world, you get editors who half their job is holding hands with the author and assuring him that everything's going to be all right, or that his work is great, and he just has to keep at it, and so on, or that he should really take his meds, or whatever it may be. But that apart, authors can be really delicate people. It's very, very hard to write, and especially to write serious work, to dedicate hours and hours and hours to writing is very hard. Authors are often introverts and sort of high-strung or delicate or sensitive people. You want an author to be sensitive, but that makes them easily wounded. So when you return their pages to them all slashed up with red, and with your comments about their grammar or their thought process, they can really take it hard. And harder than you think. For you, you're just looking at it and saying, that's a dangling modifier. And they read it and they said, my editor thinks I'm no good. So it's the editor. It pays, and I've learned this to some extent, and to the extent that I've learned it the hard way. That you really want to be sympathetic to your author. You really need to be sensitive to your author, supportive to your author, and empathic, I guess, empathic with your author, because you can shut them down. They're essentially exposing themselves. They're making themselves vulnerable by writing, whether they're writing about their inner life or just they're writing about the news. They're exposing their writing ability, or they're exposing something of themselves, or exposing something of their creative nature. And when you start slashing and bashing, they can really take it hard, and they can stop. They can just say, well, I'm going on to some other kind of service. I'll dress the deities. There they appreciate me. So so it's important for editors to encourage their writers to, if the writer deserves to be. Maybe some people you want to tell them, listen, you're such a good cook. But generally speaking, Prabhupada encouraged all of his disciples to write. We encourage devotees to write. And they may not all be great stylists, they may not be great literary figures, but we try to appreciate their work and encourage them so that they'll go on. And you never know who may start off quite poorly and develop into something, someone quite capable. If we can find in their writing something valuable, something that stands out, and encourage them to do more like that because they have it in them, then that can be a good service to our authors. This was all an answer to your question about preserving their voice. You want to recognize their voice. You want to not sort of go along with their voice. Somebody has, like if you look at Rabindra's voice and Satsvarup Maharaj's voice, they're very, very different. Both Krishna conscious authors, but very different voices. Sadaputa, the third voice, very different. So you sort of want to attune yourself to your author and try and adopt, as it were, his approach to life or to writing or to expression, so that you say, well, that's a word he would use, or this is a sentence he would, accept. If it's Sadaputa, you don't want to dumb him down to, Mary had a little lamb. If it's Rabindra Swarup, similarly, you want it to be an intellectual, to have a certain intellectual tone to it. If it's Satsvarup Maharaj, you want it to have an introspective and self-searching sort of tone. And then there's their individual manner of expression and so on. So you want to try to preserve that and bring that out. And we can talk about ways to do that. Word choice helps. Different writers, some will be like short sentence writers, some will prefer complex and compound complex sentences. A lot of preserving the writer's voice can be done just by cutting. You can take stuff that's really rambly and wordy and just cut it so that you don't add any words of your own at all. You don't even show up there, but it's just the author cut down to what he's really saying in the best possible words, without all the extra brambles and weeds and other stuff that grows in the thicket.
I have strong ideas about flow and rhythm. Should I be careful not to apply those necessarily?
You may want to discuss them with your author. Maybe your author doesn't know about rhythm. Maybe you want to talk a little bit about rhythm with your author. Or maybe he's got a different rhythm from you and you want to sort of catch it. Or maybe you just want to raise individual instances and say, does this word at the end kind of clunk? If we used did it a different way, would it keep the rhythm? Or is it too rhythmic? It can go that way also, where everything has the same rhythm and it goes blah, 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 blah. Deadens the reader that way. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Okay. More?
No, thank you.
Yes.
You spoke about this a little bit, about, of course, every writer will edit his own work to some extent.
Yeah, to some extent.
And it may be different for different people. Is there any recommendation you could give? Like, is there any guideline about how much you should cut your own or edit your own?
Generally, I would say, I don't know if you were here at the beginning, we were saying how editing and writing are two different things. Generally, I would say edit ruthlessly. There's I don't know which author it was. There's a couple of authors who said different things, writing guides who said different things. One says, look for something that you think in your writing is particularly good, particularly brilliant. Look for those things and cut them out. Murder your darlings. That's one guide put it. We write this stuff and we think it's really great, but we should look at it critically and say, how great is it? Generally, our writing benefits from careful scrutiny, our own or that of others. But it does reach a point where you become paranoid and you start cutting out stuff that's really good because you're afraid of what others will think of it, or where you're just going over something and over something. You know, you're getting like a 1% improvement in 3 months of work. At that point, as one professor said to me, at some point you just have to let it go. So there you are. Because otherwise, any author, you take his published book, a few of them say, I never look at a book again after I've written it, but most do, and every time they look at it, this could be better, this could be better, this could be better, this could be better. At some point you have to let it go.
Yeah, I was going to say, Jayadvaita and I often edit each other's works, even short things.
Well, there's a way to kill a relationship, huh?
And we're very different. You're much more careful to get it all down before you show it to me. And I'm like, I get it down and I throw it out there. And then, and play with it afterwards.
And sometimes it's helpful also to know what your author is giving you. Are they giving you just kind of an idea, a draft, or are they giving you what they think is really a pretty polished work? You don't really want to start fine-tuning something which is just a sort of a notion. So it helps that you're to be in good communication with your author, and have good communication between author and editor, so they know what they're doing. By the way, I've noticed that a lot of academic publishing these days is terribly under-edited. I didn't realize that. I always thought of, edited academic prose as being sort of to a high and finicky standard. These days it's shot. They just don't want to pay for the editors, and they
pure editing. Just
pure editing and poor editing.
And poor editing.
Yeah. Awful, just awful. Anyway, by the end of this course, you'll be able to read some of the best edited work and see how badly it's edited. Something like that. These are our course objectives. Okay. Yes.
So I know you're talking about like taking works and just kind of like paring it down.
If you speak up a little bit.
Sure. You're talking about taking works and just kind of paring it down to the essential. This might be a completely unpopular opinion, but I just really like dense work.
Really like?
Dense work, like Thoreau, and maybe. But
if you like Thoreau, you're fine.
I just mean, is it not modern to maybe it's just way too old-fashioned to have these really dense works, and maybe the modern reader is just.
What do you mean by dense?
Well, just very descriptive and just, I guess, wordy and meandering.
That's perfect. It's perfectly fine for certain kinds of works. If it were a medical treatise, you'd say, I really don't care about what pond you live next to. I want to know. But for sort of memoirs and essays and so on, to be meandering is perfectly acceptable. They're some of the greatest authors. Their literary canon is like that. It's all wandering around and exploring ideas, and one thing leads to another, and I digress, but so on.
But it doesn't get boring.
That also can happen.
But if you do it well, it won't.
It won't, right? Exactly. You can meander and be terribly boring, or you can meander and be fascinating. If you're Thoreau, you're fine. There is a sort of there's definitely a place for extensive description and for setting backgrounds, and even in scientific writing meant for a popular audience. That's a standard sort of approach. You'll find, like if you read The New Yorker or something like that, you'll find some dense, in the sense of difficult medical topic dealt with with such description of the place and the people and the weirdness of the doctor and, you know, all this kind of stuff. And you get a whole education about whatever this particular arcane operation is in such a fascinating and readable form that you can't put it down. So it's not that cutting means you just cut everything down until it's not that you make everything, what's the word, Bauhaus. You know Bauhaus architecture? The theme of Bauhaus architecture is that it should have absolutely nothing unnecessary. It should be as simple and clean as possible, like New York skyscrapers, for example. You know, no extra doodads. Yeah, just functional. A lot of modern architecture is heavily influenced by or subscribes to this Bauhaus idea. Nothing florid, nothing just expressive. It should be functional. So prose doesn't have to be like that. It can be, and there may be times and places where it should be, but by no means is that a universal principle that should be stamped on every work. Okay, having said that, my next slide bears the title, Cut Ruthlessly. Ask yourself, does it add something? And what it adds may be, you know, feeling, it may be color, it may be... What's that? It wasn't playing nice with my computer, so I've left it. It may add color, it may add insight, it may add flavor, it may add something of that, it may add essential information. But it should add something, it shouldn't just be sitting there. And what it adds should be worth adding. It shouldn't just be, well, it adds something. Does it add value? Does it move the piece forward? If not, cut. Cliches can be cut ruthlessly. Sadder but wiser, strong as an ox. In ISKCON, thinking outside the box. Oh my God. What is it? A positive alternative. That's an ISKCON cliche. Chanting Hare Krishna provides a positive alternative, as if positive alternative were just packed with meaning and you know, would spark off a revolution in the heart of the conditioned soul.
It's positive.
Sorry?
It's positive.
It's positive, but we need an alternative. In our BTG style guide, which is online on my website, jswami.info, Google BBT style guide. It has, and of course you can find much of this elsewhere, appended to it a fairly decent sample of cliches, with emphasis on ISKCON cliches. A trite stereotyped expression, a sentence or phrase usually expressing a popular or common thought or idea that has lost originality, ingenuity, and impact by long overuse. Especially pop phrases, you know, pop into ISKCON and everybody thinks they're really cool. And then after some time they just get left aside and the new one comes in. Not a lot of cliches are coming to mind right now, but there's tons of them. Do you know about fresh fish sold here? Okay, that was the initiation over there. This is your editorial initiation. This is a classic tale told by editors to their pupils. There was an editor who, on his way to work every day, passed a store that had a sign, "Fresh fish sold here." And because he was an editor, he thought that we don't need all 4 of these words. And so he went up to the proprietor and got him to knock out "sold," because obviously the fresh fish was going to be sold, and why have that extra word in there? So the man complied, and then he was walking past the sign, "Fresh fish here." And he thought, well, obviously it's fresh. No one would sell old fish. So then it was "fish here." But then he thought, well, where else would it be? So finally he got it down to one word, "fish." And then he decided you didn't need that either because you could smell it from a mile away. There's cutting, and cutting. To be and which are can often be cut. I consider the idea to be impossible. The to be can just go. Several of the proposals which were presented before the GBC, the which are can, or which were, can just drop out of sight and not be missed. Essential truth which is stated concisely is true eloquence. It's quite astonishing how much stronger your writing is just by knocking out unnecessary words, which is to be, which are, and many others that are there for structural value but don't really add structural value, which can just go. Clear? Okay. Weasel words you can cut. Those qualifiers, timid qualifiers, rather, almost, somewhat, apparently, reasonably, conceivably, relatively, fairly, kind of, pretty much, said to be, could be considered. All this stuff that they teach you in college and which poisons your style. So much of it can go. Not to say that there's not a place for a qualifier. There are arguments sometimes become stronger when appropriately qualified. But the sort of reflexive seems to be, could be, relatively, somewhat, pretty much, fairly, rather. You might as well come out and say it, you know, she's a bitch, okay? There's no rather. That wasn't a very Krishna conscious example. Another very common candidate for cutting is very. How much more common is very common than common? Very rarely tells you anything that you need to know or anything clear. James Thurber said, when you see very, change it to damn, and then cut it. There is, starting with the demonstrative, there is often a sign of wordiness and can also often be cut. There's another obstacle that stands in the way of the proposals being approved by the GBC.
Sorry, can you say that again?
Yeah, this would be better if it were broadcast, displayed. There's another obstacle, you can write this down. there's another obstacle that stands in the way of the proposal, apostrophe S, proposals being approved by the GBC. Take a few minutes and see what you can do with that. Your goal is to shorten it. Make it short and clear. Yeah, there's another obstacle that stands in the way of the proposals being approved by the GBC. Excuse me?
If there's context, then maybe you could just eliminate the...
Well, we'll talk about what you're going to do after, when we're ready. Let everybody else get a chance to work on this. Okay, let's hear what we've got.
I wrote fish.
You can get rid of that. You don't need it.
I have two possibilities. One I wrote was another obstacle exists for approval of this proposal by the GBC, or the proposal faces another obstacle to approval by the GBC.
Good.
Oh, I wrote another obstacle impedes the proposal, or impedes the proposal's approval.
Good. Yes.
I sort of cheated because...
You cheated?
Yeah.
Good.
I couldn't get this out of my mind that you could just say another obstacle is, and then like link it in with the next sentence.
So what did you do? Oh, I see, just that another obstacle is.
Yeah,
Because
Forget this.
obviously if they say another
Yeah.
obstacle, it means that there was a
Obviously.
previous...
Yeah, the sentence may be, there is another obstacle that faces, so you could just do something like, another obstacle, colon. Yeah, good. Good,
Yeah.
that's not cheating, that's art.
I had the same thought pattern because I thought if this is another obstacle...
You were looking over her shoulder, that's cheating.
Definitely, we cheat like that. No, but also then I thought, well, if it wasn't brought up, I said that another obstacle of the GBC approving proposals is, carry on.
So I have a question because I also had that idea, but my question is, I wrote another obstacle to proposals being approved is fill in the blank. Or is that by the GBC necessary, or are we already talking about the GBC so we know?
Yeah. I suppose within the limits of the exercise, you need the GBC in there.
But otherwise, we would see what precedes it.
Otherwise, you see what comes before, what comes after. Maybe you delete the whole sentence. It's obviously an obstacle. You don't even have to tell them that much. Everyone knows the GBC. Anyway, Vasudev, you have something?
Well, I came a little late.
Okay.
I'm still hacking mine apart, but part of what I'm trying to get, I'm trying to remove standing in the way an obstacle in the same sentence. One is just suggested with the other. If you have an obstacle, it's obviously standing in the way, so I don't want both of those in there.
Right.
So I'm trying to pull
Trying to work on that. Okay, I have something, I don't remember whether this is from me or one of my students. Another obstacle keeps the GBC from approving the proposal. Colon, maybe.
Does that also flip from passive voice to active voice. I don't
Say it again?
I don't fully remember like my high school grammar, but is that flipping from passive voice to active?
Yes, it is. And that's very good that you picked up on that. Passive voice is gets a very bad rap, and deservedly so, because it appears where it ought not to. It has its legitimate uses. It's useful at the end of a sentence when you want to modify whatever it is that the by is. By the GBC, which is known for dealing expeditiously with proposals or what have you. It's useful when you really don't want to say who's responsible. It has its uses. It gives a certain sense of like the man was shot is different from someone shot the man. When you want to put the emphasis on the man rather than on the object rather than the doer, it's useful. But lots of times it's just an awfully convoluted way of putting things. It's a sign of bureaucratic writing. It's a sign of sloppiness. Strong writing generally prefers the active voice. A did B, A did B to C, and so on, rather than, a man was killed by John, John killed a man, it is stronger. So here you can see that by approved by the GBC, it's not exactly passive voice, but yes it is. It's being approved by. So when you activate that and keeps the GBC from approving the proposal, you get strength. You don't need stands in the way of when keeps does the work of 4 words in one syllable. You don't need there is at all. So you're pretty much down to the substance of what you want to say here. There's another obstacle keeps the GBC from approving the proposal. And yes, you can get rid of more, including the entire sentence if you find that the sentence is unnecessary, or another obstacle, colon, depending on if it's supplied by, the rest is supplied by context. Good, well done. Putting things positively. This is George Orwell. A not unblack dog was chasing a not unsmall rabbit across a not ungreen field. Put things positively. Sometimes antithesis works. Ask not what you can do, what your country can do for you. Not peace, but a sword, and so on. Antithesis can be strong, but just saying what things are not is often not the best way to do it. Counting your words. This is what editors do. They count every word with the object of having fewer and fewer of them. The lower your number, those bars, the lower the number, the better the performance. So editors count words, and they're happy to see that count go down and down and down. If they can say 20 words worth of stuff in 15 words, and once you're done with that, then you start counting syllables. Really. I think there's something in Sanskrit. It's in Sanskrit composition. This principle is also there.
Understood means 4 padas, like a typical Gita, 4 padas, each 8 syllables, and then there's short and long syllables. So there's a set amount of.
No, that's just meter. But in Sanskrit composition, someone was telling me, I forget who it is, that something to the effect that pundits, they feel that they've like as Prabhupada said, conquered an empire if they can cut a syllable from a composition.
It goes down to a sutra eventually.
All right.
Excuse me?
So it goes down to a sutra eventually.
That's what a sutra is, yeah.
Yeah.
The maximum meaning in the minimum space. The most meaning in the least space. So word in an MS Word or LibreOffice or what have you, there's usually a word count feature. You can highlight whatever you want and see how many words it is. Now, that's not to say that this is the only, that you just become a word counter and, you say, well, I could do better than Thoreau, and you take his stuff and well, I can cut this clause and I can cut this word and I can cut this and I can cut that, and pretty soon you're down to pea soup. Not that cutting is everything, but cutting is a lot. And editors really do count the words and say, can I say this in fewer words? Can I say this in fewer syllables? Okay. This is from a book by one of the Fowler brothers. A classic book is Fowler's English Usage, written by one of two brothers. And the other brother, I think this is from his book, about word choice. Prefer the familiar word to the far-fetched, the concrete word to the abstract, the single word to the circumlocution, the short word to the long, the Saxon word to the romance.
What is the last sentence?
Saxon word to the romance. English is basically an Anglo-Saxon language, and Romance languages are Latin, Greek, Italian, French, and all of those. English does better with words like well, what would be an example? Things rather than paraphernalia. Mindfulness rather than attention. Although is mind Anglo-Saxon? Maybe not. Guts is more forceful than intestines, although each has its place. But guts is more native. This guy's got guts rather than he has intestines. Generally, and of course, so every what you're looking for is not just to expunge all the Latin or Latinate words, but you're looking for a balance. What is it that multitudinous sees incarnating? You can really get good effects from having a contrast between your Latin words and your forceful Saxon ones or your simple Saxon ones. So it's not that you want to have just plain Saxon, but again, bureaucratic and academic writing tends toward overflowing with romance, and not the kind of romance that gets people together.
Would there be a Saxon word for
Circumlocution? Yeah, beating around the bush. That would be a more native way of saying circumlocution. And these shun words are for the most part, that shun is a sign of Latin, of romance. Circumlocution, attention, all the shuns and shuns. So one, I think it's Sheridan Baker, another writing group, who says, shun the shuns. When your writing starts to run with dedications and revisions and circumlocutions, it's time to start cutting on your Latin.
So you would do that in spite of utilizing more words. I mean, you've gone from
I
one-
might
from
sometimes
one
do
word.
that. I might sometimes say, rather than have one Latin word, I'd be happier with 3 short Saxon ones. Yeah, I might. Or I might say, what's a good one-word Saxon equivalent? Either way, I might go. But once I start seeing my prose running and running with discussions of revisions, of alterations, of alternatives, of so on and so on, and I say, come on, can I say this in this, simply and directly? That's the title of a book by Jacques Barzun, I think, Simple and Direct, a book about writing. Prefer the concrete word to the abstract. This is from this is from Elements of Style, I think. In proportion as the manners, customs, and amusements of a nation are cruel and barbarous, the regulations of its penal code will be severe. All abstractions, really. In proportion as the manners, customs, and amusements, these are all category words, are cruel and barbarous, the regulations of its penal code will be severe. Perfectly intelligible, grammatical, it's balanced, and so on. Here's the more concrete version. In proportion as men delight in battles, bullfights, and combats of gladiators, will they punish by hanging, burning, and the rack. Picture words. We think in pictures, not in abstractions, not so easily in abstractions. Battles, bullfights, combats of gladiators, hanging, burning, the rack. These are all very specific, very clear.
Generality is the enemy of art.
Yes. Yeah. And it's worth it to interrogate your writing and say, could this be made more specific, more clear, more direct? And even you take something, often you just take it and make a person out of it. An example, this is what happened to Thomas Fishburne on August 3rd, 1902, or whatever it is. Makes it definite, makes it specific. It's not anymore about the injustice of in American history anymore. It's about one specific person. Obama was pretty good with that. I'd never heard him speak much, but I heard one of his speeches, and he talked about some woman who'd come to one of his rallies and why she came so far. And it was worth 20 minutes of abstract oratory. You had this picture of this one woman who had a cause, an urge, an imperative to come and support his campaign. It was effective.
All of these things seem to be, they're reminding me of, as you mentioned at the beginning, writers tend to be very sensitive,
Mm-hmm.
and putting themselves out there, and you have to, as a writer, you have to have a level of confidence to avoid some of these abstractions and passive writing.
Yeah. An insight, because we're confident. Proportions, the manners, customs, and amusements of a nation and cruel barbarous. What's wrong with that, But if you interrogate it, if you look at it critically, if you ask yourself if you could say something more clear, more definite, maybe more personal, maybe something more within your experience, you could come up with, I hope not hanging, burning in the rack, but something that's memorable or moving or at least more clear. Okay. Another example. This is George Orwell. He took a biblical text and modernized it. Objective consideration of contemporary phenomena compels the conclusion that success or failure in competitive activities exhibits no tendency to be commensurate with innate capacity, but that a considerable element of the unpredictable must inevitably be taken into account. I returned and saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, neither yet bread to the wise, nor yet riches to men of understanding, nor yet favor to men of skill, but time and chance happeneth to them all.
Kohelet by any chance?
Yeah, that's Kohelet. Specifics, pictures, and along with that you get simplicity and force. And the left-hand side runs with Latin. Objective, consideration, contemporary phenomena, compels, all these comes and adds and ifs, conclusion, competitive activities, exhibits, tendency, commensurate, innate, capacity, considerable, element, unpredictable, inevitably. And here you've got, I saw the sun, the race, the swift, the battle, the strong, bread, wise, riches, men, understanding, favor, skill, time, chance. There's the difference between Romance and Saxon. Okay. Prefer the single word to the circumlocution. Held a meeting? In one word? Met. Submitted his resignation? Take into consideration? Gave permission to?
Agreed.
Permitted, allowed, agreed? In spite of the fact that?
Despite. Despite.
Well, that doesn't quite do it. In spite of the fact that he was blind. Although. Somebody, I guess it's Strunk again, Strunk and White, said that the fact that is such a sign of worthiness that it should be edited out of every sentence in which it occurs. Prefer the short word to the long. This is T.E. Lawrence. Riding between 2 or 3 of these built-up islands, we made for the far bank of the valley. On our way was the main bed of the winter floods, a sweep of white shingle and boulders, quite flat. Down its middle, from Palm Grove on the one side to Palm Grove on the other, lay a reach of clear water, perhaps 200 yards long and 12 feet wide, sand-bottomed, and bordered on each brink by a 10-foot lawn of thick grass and flowers. On it we halted a moment to let our camels put their heads down and drink their fill, and the relief of the grass to our eyes after the day-long hard glitter of the pebbles was so sudden that involuntarily I glanced up to see if a cloud had not covered the face of the sun. That's 145 words, 24 of them of 2 syllables. one has 6 syllables. The rest are all 1-syllable words. And it doesn't lack for imagination or vividness. If you do the math, that's 25, means 120 of those words are 1 syllable. 120 out of 145. Now, in fairness, that doesn't represent his writing as a whole, but you get the idea that you don't have to have a lot of syllables to have a clear and vivid piece of writing. Another one. This is the Bible again. And the king was much moved, and went up to the chamber over the gate, and wept. And as he went, thus he said, O my son, Absalom, my son, Absalom, would God I had died for thee. O Absalom, my son, my son. Apart from the proper name, there's one word there with 2 syllables. Okay.
Now that guideline doesn't apply if you're writing for the New York Times, right?
No, it does apply if you're writing for the New York Times. It very much applies. If you're a professional writer, if you're a journalist, getting your words down to short ones rather than long ones is very much what makes for high quality writing, whether you're an essayist or a novelist or a journalist or a person who writes labels for clothing or fire warnings or what have you. Simple and direct is great. Now that doesn't, again, this is not to say that you punish your writing and whip it until there are no more words of 3 syllables or more. There may be the long word that exactly says what you want. It may be the best word or no other challenger is in sight. It's not that only one word, that our goal is to scrunch it down until you've only got monosyllables. I've seen there are people who as an exercise, they've written things in not more than a syllable, or syllable, not words of not more than 6 letters and that sort of thing. But that's not your usual mode of expression. But the idea is that words that can be short should be. If a long word says what you want, use it. Otherwise, why the long word? Why all the long words when a short word would say it as clearly and more powerfully, more appropriately? And again, in a medical text, you don't want to replace intestines with guts. But even in medical writing, you don't have to have all of these polysyllables where a simple direct word would do. You need those polysyllables for specific items, for physical nomenclature or for the name of a particular instrument or something. But it's not that your verbs also have to be polysyllabic and as long as possible. So you want to mix an appropriate mixture of long words and short, of Roman and Saxon, of whatever and whatever else. But you don't want to just reflexively throw out polysyllabic utterances that don't mean more than a short, direct phrase would accomplish. Yes?
Just on that note, there's this Japanese author, Haruki Murakami. He does a lot of like surrealistic novels, and I had heard this and just thought it was so interesting that he wrote his first novel in Japanese and really didn't like it, and he chose to rewrite it in English despite limited English abilities. And it was precisely the limitations of writing in a foreign language that removed the obstacles he faced in trying to write in his native one. Unable to pen complex thoughts in English, he discovered that his language became more simplified and free of unnecessary components. I just thought that was so interesting.
Nice. Anything more about this?
It seems, at least from these examples, that once you can get rid of the excessive long words and the extra romance words and things like that, that your end result is something that could be spoken out loud fairly clearly.
Yeah, exactly.
That would be a good test.
And that's a very good test. I think most writers probably read their work out loud. And that's an exercise I recommend. I do a lot of it in my head, I sort of hear it. But for you, there's really finally no substitute really for reading your work out loud. Because then you start to hear how ponderous, how boring and dull these words are. And couldn't I use a more vivid, couldn't I use a more powerful, couldn't I use a more emotive, couldn't I use a more simple word and get this across? Reading out loud is great, whether it's your work or somebody else's work. Just read it again. And yeah, could somebody say it? Great. Someone told a story, this was told by an editor or a journalism professor, if I remember, about some guy who was using some sort of chemical, and he wanted to know if he could use it for such and such purpose. And so he wrote to the company, and he got a letter back, and it said something to the effect that the combustible nature of the chemical composition of the blah, 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 blah could result in a blah, 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 blah. And he wrote back and said, yeah, but can I use it for such and such purpose? And he got back again, the consensus of and he finally, after 3 or 4 exchanges like that, he wrote back and said, well, I gather that it's okay to use. He got a letter back. He said, don't do it. The damn thing will be exploded. Okay. The Saxon word to the romance. These are all romance words: display, fortitude, prevarication. Give me a Saxon for display. Show. Fortitude. Prevarication. Lie, yes. There's a GBC resolution that concerns prevarications. Somebody must have been very proud of that.
Well, I do feel, I don't know if you felt this, but like in academic or high intellectual writing, there's an overabundance of long, complicated, romance words.
The word overabundance, the syllable over is significant.
Yeah, there's an abundance.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with long, precise words, but when it just runs and runs and runs with fortitude, displays, prevarications, and so on, you say they went to college. Didn't anyone ever teach them to write?
No.
Or rather, what happens is the problem with their writing is they went to college, and their style or their ability to express themselves was poisoned by academic conventions and this awful style of writing in which you say everything in a highfalutin way and qualify yourself, qualify the qualifications of your qualifiers, and finally nobody can read what you've written or make sense of it.
And the worst is going to the conferences and having to listen to
Oh,
those
God,
papers.
yes. Lord save us. Now that said, there's some beautiful academic writing. There are scholars who write marvelously, with clarity and force and depth and so on. But for every one of those, there's 8,400,000.
Well, if there's a tone of formality that is desired, then it's just a question of balance.
It's not necessarily just balance, but it's choice. Is guts the right thing to say? I mean, on a formal occasion, it may be the right thing to say that, our nation should not lack guts. If that's a formal address to Congress, maybe that's exactly the right word. You want to get those guys out of their chairs and voting yes on this proposal so that we'll send our men to whatever place we intend to colonize and extract the assets of.
Guts as opposed to intestinal fortitude.
Yes, exactly. But there's sometimes the tone may be really wrong for your purpose. That guts is too strong or inappropriate in some other way. You need to see your sentence, first of all your audience, your purpose, your context, and say to each word, are you the right word? Are you too formal? Are you too informal? Too lax? Are you limp? Are you strong? Are you clear? Are you out of place? Are you wearing sneakers in a formal occasion? These are all the questions that really almost every word has to answer, or every word really has to answer. And it's not that because you're in an academic setting you have to throw in hermeneutics and ontology and all of that stuff just to show them that you know. They know that you know. If you've got a PhD, you know what ontology is. You know what hermeneutics is. You don't have to show off. So you use those words when you really need to emphasize that this is an ontological question rather than a historical question or some other kind of question. You use it. If it's the word that really conveys what you want, you use it. Otherwise, why are you just to throw around academic words because you're in an academic environment is pointless and counterproductive, really. It's counterproductive. There's a tale somewhere, not a tale, an account somewhere of some physicist, I believe he was, whose work was ignored for like decades just because it was so densely expressed, that it was expressed in such needlessly complicated language that the brilliance of his ideas went unrecognized for several decades. Whereas if you look at someone like Freud, many of whose ideas are now discredited, he expressed them so well that people thought that this is, wow, he's really got a case here. He expresses himself very clearly, very, very well. So, getting your proposal passed, getting your ideas accepted is not just a matter of throwing around big words or keeping a decent quotient of big words there. Mm-mm. Just try to avoid prevarications. Okay. Plain words. Coming back to the same point. Prefer the plain word to the complicated. Is that what it was? Someone took a note.
Concrete to abstract?
No.
Short to long, single to circumlocution.
Plain word to the circumlocution, maybe that's what it is.
Single.
Single word to the circumlocution. But plain, anyway, plain words. I'd have to go back a few slides to see what it was. But here's an example. We are endeavoring to construct a more inclusive society. That was what was written for FDR. And this is what he made it. We're going to make a country in which no one is left out.
Okay, so I'm struck by the idea of sophistication.
Yeah. People put on airs. They aspire to a higher ethereal level where everyone uses language that shows that they've done 6 years of graduate school. And it's awful. It's just awful. I think, some people who are supposed to know say that my book was well written. I attribute half of that to my not having gone to college. If I'd gone there, one can escape, but one can also just adopt this obnoxious and pretentious style of expression in which you have to say everything in a more complicated way and can't get down to brass tacks. So this is presumably a formal address, and FDR said, we're going to make a country in which no one is left out. Not we're going to endeavor to construct a more inclusive, and that again, it's simple Saxon language. No word that anyone with a 4th grade education couldn't understand, and so much more powerful. It's more specific, a country rather than a society.
The word more seems to be very ambiguous.
A more inclusive, it's bureaucraties, a more inclusive society. What is that? It's just an awful abstraction. We're going to endeavor, that means we're going to be very serious about it. We all endeavor to construct a more inclusive society. And here, we're going to make a country where no one's left out. It's so much more, that even no one is like, no one is a someone. No someone is left out. You're down to people again, instead of societies and constructed by endeavor. Okay.
Yeah, again, it seems like this more abstract language is a way of escaping from saying something concrete.
Yeah, it's a cop-out.
Yeah, exactly. You don't really have to be called out for what are you actually saying.
Yeah, to say something definite is harder work.
Exactly.
And once you're good at it, it comes more natural. Thoreau would naturally write that way, but it takes practice. Or it takes unlearning.
It's also harder work to actually, we are never to
That just rolls off your pen, right?
But you're making more concrete statement means you're taking more responsibility for that statement also.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
is what people want to avoid.
Yeah, abstractions are like places to hide.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's cowardly.
I don't want to bring up politics, but it feels to me that Trump tends to talk in those, when he's coherent, talks in those strong Saxon, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And people respond to it.
I missed the whole election. I missed the whole run up to the election. I didn't have, I just listened to other people complain about him or praise, whatever. But I happened to see his first press conference. I pressed the wrong button or something. And you're right. I mean, my impression, I don't, what his policies are, but the man was very good at what he was doing.
I think that attributes to like his platform. I mean, his more platform in speaking of not like what he believes in, but how he's presenting it. And he just essentially just gamed Twitter to where he's limited to 140 characters. Blah 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 blah. Sad.
Yeah.
Blah 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 blah. Bad.
Right.
It's just.
I mean, again, not getting too much into the politics, but my impression was that he was very good at what he was doing. He was speaking to, he knew who his audience was, his intended audience. He was speaking their language. I had no opinion about the content one way or the other. I just don't care. But I did observe that he was very good at communicating in a populist, down-to-earth kind of way. You wouldn't mistake what he was saying. He was definite, he was clear, he was obnoxious, yes, but there you go.
He even uses those short evocative phrases like lock her up and drain the swamp. It's like it's so clear.
And a lot of politicians, in order to sound sophisticated or whatever, they speak in ways that come across as elitist, and people don't respond.
And it lacks emotion.
It's like the polar opposite is Al Gore.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Al Gore's like traditionally he's an orator.
Uh-huh.
So he's just like, and it's not that he can't be direct, but he uses polysyllabic words.
Mm-hmm. And again, we're not the enemies of multisyllable words, but if that's your only stock in trade, you may find you're sort of facing an empty hall.
Yeah, because I know, like, in Ravindra Prabhu's writing, they'll use many polysyllables.
Yeah.
But he knows that's the exact word that's
That
describing
fits.
what he would
Exactly.
want to say, and he spends days, figuring out that one word.
Yeah. William Buckley, who I often like, was famous or notorious for using long and even obscure words, but his plea was that these were the words that he wanted to use to express precisely what the idea was. Okay?
I'm just a little caught up still. Because the value of poetry in writing, and one poetic device is sort of elevated language. And breaking this down, it's like, especially with Trump and appealing to the base, you want somebody in that position to at least be the smartest person in the room, ideally, And I totally get and agree with the point of like this being vague. What does this mean? And policy. I don't have anything to say, so I covered up with flowery language.
There was some video that went viral of the Prime Minister of Canada, who was attending some sort of gathering of scientists, and the topic of quantum computing came up, and he had a background. He has a background in science, and he said, it's not my place really to talk about quantum computing. Basically, quantum computing is, and he expressed it so clearly and cogently that anyone could understand it, and the audience all applauded, and it went viral. He didn't, say anything obscure and difficult and complicated. He just said basically, ba 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 ba, and everybody went, wow.
Which again, that's harder to do than.
It's harder to do than to just dig in there and say everything and using the technical jargon in which scientists speak to one another, or the Krishna conscious jargon in which devotees talk to one another. Symptoms of transcendental experience, of mellows, of, we have all this language that means something to us, or is supposed to mean something to us, but leaves everyone else blinking.
I would argue it really doesn't mean too much to us either, other than a nice
I
word.
think you're right. But certainly to outsiders it means who knows what. So as much as scientists have their jargon, devotees have their jargon. Scientists and philosophers and academics and military people, they all have their jargon, and so do devotees. And part of the challenge of good Krishna conscious writing is how to undo the jargon and express things in plain, straightforward language, in plain words.
I forget the context, but I was saying to someone one time something, and I used the phrase non-different. And he looked at me quizzically, and he said, "You mean the same?"
Yeah, because in Sanskrit it's Advaita. So Dvaita is different and is not, so non-different. And maybe we sometimes mean something by non-different that's not quite, that's the same. But even, you might even want to be like self-conscious, the non-different, the term usually used, or, something acknowledging, there's kind of a weird word, but we use it. Or that it's the translation of Advaita, which means da-da-da-da-da. At least being aware that this is jargon. Sometimes jargon is good. Jargon, it means something. Give me a Phillips. It's a certain kind of a screwdriver, and you don't need more words. I just need a Phillips. But then for people who don't know what a Phillips is, you have to explain that it's, one of those little screwdrivers that goes 4 ways instead of 2 ways. So at least asking ourselves, is this jargon? Is this something that my audience will understand? Where am I going with this? And I would say erring to err on the side of simplicity and clarity and plainness, rather than on the side of using larger and more technical language to impress or to keep your membership. Okay, let's see what else we've got here. Good. This is connotations. You're all familiar, I think, with denotation and connotation. Denotation is what the word signifies. The denotation of guts and intestines is identical. They're the same, 3.5 miles of plumbing. But the connotation is the feel of it, and that's very different. And you can accomplish or undo a lot through the connotations of words. This is all really just 2 columns of words for utterance. Said, confirmed, remarked, whispered, insisted, complained, muttered, vowed, claimed, admitted, stated, explained, argued, ordered, blurted out, yelled, snorted, bragged, barked, snarled. And you'll find that a lot of yellow journalism, or a lot of even a lot is done by saying things that are true, but carefully selecting your terms to give a connotation that favors your side or the way you want the thing to be said. To insist on something is different from explaining it. Explain implies that the thing is perfectly reasonable and it only needs to be set out before you in reasonable terms, and you'll accept it. To insist on something means to be just the opposite, to be unreasonable, pig-headed, obstinate, But what is it? It's the same thing. You just said something, but it's you insisted. He insisted that it was a screwdriver. It's much different from explaining that it was a screwdriver.
It just also implies that sometimes the other party is very obstinate and unreasonable, and you have to insist in order to get to your point.
Yeah, some sort of butting heads is going on. But usually whoever's insisting is either being pig-headed or perhaps brave, perhaps standing up for the truth no matter what. He insisted that liberty was not too high a price to pay, but rather that his life was not too high a price to pay for liberty, for the liberty of his countrymen. To insist on something true is a virtue, but it's a lot different from just saying it. To blurt out basically means you lost control. To yell means you really lost control. Blurt out also implies you really shouldn't have said that. You probably disclosed something you didn't mean to disclose.
Yeah, even just with one of these words, you can paint a whole picture around. You
can paint a whole picture just by which verb you use. If you look at if you look at the New York Times, a favorite, the default verb for a statement is said. Yeah, it's flat. It doesn't go this way or the other. The mayor said, rather than explained, insisted, blurted out, argued, barked, snarled, whispered, remarked, admitted, which implies, I'd see this all the time in, this stuff about Jayadvaita Swami. Is that Jayadvaita Swami admitted that Prabhupada never told him. I didn't admit it, I insisted. So
that's a really good example because it does reveal an agenda. It's a good example because it really does reveal an agenda.
Yeah, and not that agendas are always bad. You're trying to convey perhaps the drama of Nelson Mandela standing before the court and expressing his, what is it? His determination that this is something that I live for and that I'm willing to die for. To have, to use strong words to convey that scene. It's more than just a said. It deserves more than just a said. And you're not sinning by using a more vivid word. So words have, but this is the power that words have. They connote things. You can use them, you can employ them for evil purposes, you can employ them for noble purposes, but this is what words do. They signify something, and they create a mood. They convey emotion. They convey feelings. They convey context. They convey presuppositions. Poetry, because you mentioned poetry, so much is on connotation. There's an example. Robert Tolis, I think, is the author. It's a book called Straight and Crooked Thinking. He gave an example, some poetic line about, what was it? Anyway, it had poetic language, and he just took it and used clinical language and showed what it would be, like, Sarah's fair breast became Penelope's white chest. It wasn't the same. The words have connotations, and poetry so much deals with the feeling of words, the sound of words. Puddle wonderful. The connotations of words, the history of words, the background of words, the connections of words, the word that was used somewhere else that brings an allusion, not illusion, to your mind. Yes?
Can I just ask a practical question?
Mm-hmm.
Usually if I'm looking up words, like I just use an online thesaurus, but is there a good comprehensive thesaurus that you use?
Okay, a thesaurus question. First thing about thesauri is beware of them. Because people start to use them to look for more complicated words, bigger words, more impressive words, and that's bad. Or they don't want to use, they have what they call, what one author called, I think it was Theodore Bernstein, monologophobia. Fear of using the same word more than once. So he saw the building, he thought it was an impressive edifice, and so on and so on. He just can't say building twice because that would betray his lack of education or something along those lines. So you don't want to use a thesaurus for that. What I use the thesaurus more often for is finding a simpler word or a more powerful word or a word that's closer to what I want to say than the word that first came to my mind. That's what I would use a thesaurus for, not to find a more fancy or impressive word. I might use it to find the word I was reaching for. Now, that said, there are two kinds of thesauruses, basically. The original plan of Roget, whose name is attached to every thesaurus, regardless of what it is, for marketing reasons. His original plan had words grouped together by categories, and then an index at the end that would lead you to the proper category, as it were, category, subcategory, subcategory. And then there's the dictionary form of thesaurus, which has a lot of words in a straight dictionary format. You look for suitable and you find fit, you find appropriate, you find so on and so on and so on. It's a straight dictionary way. The dictionary ones are often considered easier to use. They get you there faster. They do the job. I prefer the original plan, and I would recommend Roget's, now I'm not sure if I'm dating myself, Third International. There might be a fourth one now. But Roget's Third International Thesaurus is the one that I use, and of course his original plan has been updated and improved, but the basic principle of it stays the same. An index with a section of entries and an index to get you there. Roget's Third International Thesaurus, you can look and see if there's a fourth, but the third was the latest one I saw, which may be, dating me. I have an electronic version which I can, you can see me for. Microsoft Word has a thesaurus. Most word processing LibreOffice has a thesaurus. Most word processing programs these days have a thesaurus. Sometimes they're good. You're just looking for a word and you hit your control whatever and there's the word you wanted. But when you want to do deeper research, then a larger thesaurus, an offline thesaurus. and especially that a thesaurus with that plan, because things are grouped in such a way that the category may be next to the category that has the word that you need. And I find it much more helpful than the dictionary form. Okay. These are standard tools, by the way, dictionaries, a good dictionary, a good thesaurus. People have different opinions about what a good dictionary is. Merriam-Webster's New Collegiate is a kind of a default for many people. They tend to be a little, they're not a little, they're determined descriptivists. The battlefield in Krishna Consciousness is between personalism and impersonalism. The battlefield among, come on, what are dictionary makers? What's the word? It'll come to me later. Lexicographers. The battle lines along for lexicographers is prescriptivists and descriptivists. The prescriptivists say the dictionary should tell you what the proper use of a word is, whether a word is formal or informal. It should tell you that ain't is not well accepted. That what's the word? Enthused is a back formation that's usually considered less unacceptable in edited writing, and so on. That's the prescriptivists. And the descriptivists, they just want to tell you how people use words. Ain't is fine, you know, it's used all over the place by, it's been used since the 1400s or whatever it is. And why shouldn't you use it if it feels right? Now that said, I'm being a little stereotypical. Even confirmed descriptivists will acknowledge that some people consider this word unsuitable in formal contexts, and so on and so on and so on. But I guess it was the Webster's Third International did away with usage labels and all of that, and there was a huge uproar about it. Anyway, Merriam-Webster's as a firm is strongly descriptivist. That said, they make good dictionaries. There are others also. If you want the biggest and most sort of the granddaddy of dictionaries, Oxford's Complete, which is available as software. What's that?
The computer application for OED is very helpful versus the large.
Yeah. Nobody goes out and uses books anymore. But Merriam-Webster's is good. I like the American Heritage Dictionary, the software version. They haven't updated it in 15 or 20 years or something, but it's very easy to use, and I find it well written and sometimes better than Merriam-Webster. If I'm serious about a word and really want to get down to the bottom of it, I usually look at Merriam-Webster, American Heritage, and the Oxford English Dictionary, the OED as it's known. And then I know pretty much whatever there is to be known about the word from dictionary land. And that's where I would go. But you want to have a good dictionary. You want to have one dictionary that's your standard for spelling, because there are different standards. So choose one. That's the main thing. The BBT standard is the first spelling given in the Merriam-Webster's New Collegiate. Because dictionaries will often give you alternative spellings. They'll give you one spelling and then another spelling and then a third spelling. So our standard of the BBT is the first spelling given in Merriam-Webster's New Collegiate. And you can use a different standard, but just whatever standard you have, stick to it. That's the main thing. In a lot of editing, that's the main principle. If you're going to spell it this way, always spell it that way. If you're going to capitalize it, always capitalize it. If you're going to use diacritics, always for this word, always use it for that. Use them for that word. Consistency is a big deal in editing. Consistency. It's a big deal. We are at 12:32. Going by the book, we should take a break now, and why should we not go by the book? So we are breaking. With your permission, we'll break here, and we will resume at 1:30 here. If there are particular things you want me to address, then write them down, bring them up, or maybe at the beginning of the session, ask me, are you going to speak about this, or give me a sheet with your items, your issues, and I'm happy to tailor what we're doing to your interests and concerns and perplexities and dilemmas and emergencies and so on.